Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most shocking and unexpected turns in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Just when Russian forces believed they had driven the Ukrainians into a full retreat, what happened next completely turned the battlefield upside down. This moment changed the tempo of the war, exposed new strategies, and sent shockwaves through both armies and across the world. So let's break down how Ukraine pulled off one of the most stunning tactical surprises of the war. In the early stages of this confrontation, Russian commanders were convinced that Ukrainian troops had finally run out of strength. After weeks of relentless bombardment and pressure across multiple fronts, Russian intelligence reports painted a picture of Ukrainian units falling back, exhausted and disorganized. Moscow believed victory was near in that sector. Propaganda outlets even began to celebrate an upcoming triumph, claiming that Ukrainian defenses were collapsing and Russian troops were advancing uncontested. But as history has shown time and again, underestimating the Ukrainian military has proven to be one of Russia's greatest mistakes. What seemed like a retreat was actually a calculated maneuver, a trap designed to lure Russian units deep into a kill zone. Ukraine's generals, well aware of Russia's eagerness to exploit any perceived weakness, planned something that would flip the situation entirely. The so-called retreat was part of a larger deception operation. Ukrainian units pulled back strategically, leaving behind a few abandoned positions, destroyed vehicles, and even decoy equipment to convince Russian drones and reconnaissance teams that the line had broken. Russian forces took the bait instantly. Columns of tanks, armored vehicles, and infantry began pushing forward, thinking the enemy had fled. As those forces advanced, Ukrainian artillery units hidden in the surrounding forests and urban areas began receiving precise coordinates. In seconds, the quiet fields erupted in thunder. Dozens of Russian vehicles were struck simultaneously, and the advancing units suddenly realized they had entered a deadly ambush zone. The retreating Ukrainian troops had repositioned to higher ground, forming a semicircle around the Russian advance. Within minutes, Ukrainian drone operators unleashed swarms of first-person view kamikaze drones targeting command vehicles, ammunition trucks, and communication hubs. The chaos was immediate and devastating. Russian troops who had been cheering moments earlier were suddenly under a storm of precision strikes from artillery, drones, and anti-tank missiles. The battlefield turned into a nightmare for them. This was not a random victory. It was a meticulously planned counter-ambush that demonstrated how far Ukraine's military intelligence and tactical innovation had evolved. Instead of fighting on predictable lines, they used deception, timing, and modern technology to outmaneuver a larger force. Ukrainian commanders had anticipated the exact route of the Russian advance by monitoring intercepted communications and satellite imagery. The operation was a blend of modern warfare and classical strategy. It echoed tactics from past wars, using feigned retreats to draw the enemy into disadvantageous positions, but with a 21st century twist. Drones provided real-time eyes on the battlefield. Precision artillery guided by GPS ensured that every strike hit key targets, and mobile infantry units quickly sealed the trap. As Russian troops tried to reorganize and call for support, their communication lines were jammed by Ukrainian electronic warfare units. Panic spread across the Russian ranks. Videos later surfaced showing abandoned Russian tanks and vehicles still burning, with soldiers retreating on foot. The entire operation, which Moscow had expected to be a swift advance, turned into a disaster within hours. What makes this event so remarkable is how Ukraine executed it under conditions of apparent weakness. They didn't have numerical superiority or overwhelming firepower in that sector. What they had was intelligence, agility, and discipline. The troops knew when to fall back and when to strike, maintaining complete coordination even under fire. Reports from the field described Ukrainian units fighting with unmatched precision. Anti-tank teams operated from hidden positions, destroying Russian armor at long range. Artillery batteries switched locations constantly to avoid counter-fire. Drone operators communicated directly with frontline soldiers, providing instant targeting data. Every part of the operation worked in harmony, showing how much Ukraine's military had learned and adapted since the start of the war. Meanwhile, Russian media tried to downplay the event, calling it a temporary tactical setback. But soldiers returning from the front described the scene as total chaos. Many admitted they were caught completely off guard, having been told that Ukrainian forces were fleeing. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by coordinated drone attacks, precision artillery, and sniper fire from concealed positions. For Ukraine, the operation was more than just a military success. It was a morale booster and a psychological strike. It reminded Russian troops that nothing in this war could be taken for granted, and that every step forward could lead them straight into a trap. It also boosted Ukrainian confidence at a time when the war's momentum seemed uncertain. This success also highlighted how Ukraine's Western training and equipment had transformed its tactics. The use of layered defenses, mobile artillery, and advanced drone warfare reflected NATO-style coordination. Analysts say that what Ukraine achieved in that battle demonstrated a new model of hybrid warfare, one that blends conventional tactics with cutting-edge technology and asymmetric thinking. The timing of the counter-ambush was also crucial. It came just as Russia was redeploying reserves from other fronts, believing that Ukraine was too weak to launch any major offensive. Instead, Ukrainian commanders used the element of surprise to inflict massive losses on those redeployed units. In just a few days, Russian forces lost dozens of armored vehicles, hundreds of soldiers, and several key supply lines were disrupted. Satellite imagery after the battle showed burnt-out wrecks stretching across several kilometers. Russian supply convoys that tried to enter the area were also struck by long-range missiles, further compounding their losses. Ukrainian forces then advanced to secure the destroyed territory, collecting intelligence and capturing equipment left behind. The psychological impact of this operation rippled far beyond the battlefield. Russian soldiers began expressing frustration and distrust in their command, questioning how intelligence could have failed so completely. Many pointed out that drone reconnaissance had been ignored, and warnings of potential traps were dismissed by overconfident officers. For Ukraine, the victory served as proof that smart strategy could overcome numerical disadvantages. The country's defense ministry celebrated it as another example of how creativity and courage could rewrite the rules of modern warfare. Videos of the aftermath went viral online, showing the precision of Ukraine's counterattacks and the sheer scale of Russia's losses. International observers called it one of the most successful counter-ambushes in the war so far. It demonstrated that Ukraine had moved far beyond defensive warfare and was capable of orchestrating large-scale deception operations. Western military analysts compared it to classic historical maneuvers where smaller forces defeated larger ones through intelligence and misdirection. The event also exposed growing weaknesses in the Russian command structure. Rigid hierarchy, poor communication, and outdated battlefield assumptions made them vulnerable to agile tactics. While Ukrainian forces relied on small unit flexibility and real-time data, Russian units were still following slow, centralized orders. By the time those orders reached the front, the situation had already changed drastically. In the weeks following the battle, Ukrainian forces continued to exploit the momentum. They pushed further into Russian-occupied zones, reclaiming strategic villages and supply routes. Each advance built on the previous one, using speed and unpredictability as key weapons. Russian forces, drained and demoralized, began to consolidate defensively, avoiding open field advances that could expose them to similar traps. The operation also deepened the discussion about how the war was evolving. Analysts noted that Ukraine had become a master of adaptive warfare, turning every setback into a learning experience. Where Russian forces relied on numbers, Ukraine relied on information. Where Russia used brute force, Ukraine used precision. And where Russia sought control through fear, Ukraine inspired resilience through strategy. On social media, Ukrainian soldiers celebrated their success modestly, calling it just another day of defense. But for the world watching, it was clear this was much more than that. It was a message that Ukraine would not be easily defeated, that even apparent retreats could become opportunities for victory. The footage from the battlefield told the whole story: destroyed Russian convoys, scattered equipment, and Ukrainian flags rising again over contested positions. It symbolized not only tactical brilliance, but also national determination. Even under immense pressure, Ukraine's spirit remained unbroken. For Russia, the lesson was bitter: overconfidence, poor coordination, and underestimating the enemy had once again turned potential victory into humiliation. Commanders who had promised swift progress were now facing scrutiny, and soldiers on the ground were left questioning the logic of their orders. As the dust settled, one thing became clear: the war was far from over, and its outcome would not be decided by sheer numbers or firepower alone. Strategy, intelligence, and adaptability would determine who held the upper hand in the months ahead. Ukraine's daring counterstrike became a case study in modern military academies around the world. Experts dissected it as a perfect blend of deception, timing, and technology, a real world demonstration of how a smaller, determined force could outthink a larger opponent. It wasn't just about winning a single battle. It was about changing the perception of what victory looks like in the 21st century. This event reinforced a powerful truth: wars are not only fought with weapons, but with minds. And in this battle, Ukraine proved once again that its strategy, courage, and adaptability were forces Russia could not easily crush. The story of this ambush will be remembered as one of the defining moments in the conflict, when the hunters became the hunted, and a retreat turned into triumph. As Ukraine continues to defend its land, one message echoes across the battlefield and beyond: every inch of ground is fought with intelligence, determination, and heart. And no matter how many times the world counts them out, Ukraine continues to rise, defying the odds and rewriting the rules of war. That's the full story of how the Russians thought the Ukrainians were in full retreat, and then everything changed in an instant. This moment not only shifted the momentum of the conflict, but also reminded the world that in war, nothing is ever as it seems.